Well, hey, I was right.
Anything we need to know, as soon as I find out.
You're watching the most powerful podcaster in the world make a choice that will change everything. Joe Rogan built an empire. Over $250 million, 11 million downloads per episode, more influence than CNN's entire primetime lineup. He could talk to anyone, say anything, and the world would listen. But something happened, something shifted. And now, the same people who made him king are watching him fall. His downloads are dropping. His comedy club is being called a joke. His friends are distancing themselves. And for the first time in years, Joe Rogan is facing a question he never thought he'd have to answer. What happens when the king loses his kingdom? But here's what nobody's talking about. Was it really sudden? Or did we all miss the signs along the way? This is the story of how America's most influential podcaster went from untouchable to unwatchable. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll see the entire media landscape differently. Let's get into it. So here's where it all starts to unravel, and it's not where you'd think. To understand what's happening to Joe Rogan right now in 2025, we need to go back to when he made his first critical mistake. And it wasn't about politics. It wasn't about controversy. It was about identity. See, the old Joe Rogan had something that made him special. He'd openly admit he was just a comedian who didn't know what he was talking about.
Quick turnaround, come back.
Right.
All right.
So,
Spill the beans.
Let's talk biology, and let me just say, I know it's not everybody's bag.
He'd bring on experts, shut up, and let them teach him. That humility, that was the secret sauce. But then something changed. Around 2017, 2018, journalists started calling him part of something called the intellectual dark web. This group included Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Eric Weinstein, Dave Rubin, basically a collection of thinkers who felt mainstream media wasn't giving them a fair shake. And at first, Joe was confused by the label. He even tried to downplay it. Pro-gay rights, pro-women's rights, pro-choice, pro-marijuana, pro-universal healthcare. Like, what else do I have to do? But here's the thing, and this is crucial. When you tell someone over and over that they're a genius, eventually they start to believe it. Dave Rubin was on the podcast telling Joe they were winning some kind of cultural war, that they were changing minds, that they were the intellectual movement of the future. And you can actually watch it happen in real time. The guy who used to say, "I'm just a comedian."
Like, the TV show was just a lot of money. It was like I couldn't sleep that night. It was like, I'm a paid regular. Like, I'm a real comedian. I'm a real comedian. A real comedian. I'm at the store. I'm a real comedian. I'm at the Comedy Store. Dude, I always knew I was going there. It was a religious calling. And the Comedy Store was terrible. And there was all these people that she passed that were like, I'm telling you, talentless.
Started acting like he had the answers. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so Joe got a big head, so what? Lots of successful people do. But hold on, because this ego shift led directly to something much worse. Something that would fundamentally break what made his show work in the first place. His interview style completely changed. According to critics who've analyzed hundreds of episodes, the Joe who used to ask questions and listen, he's gone. Now, you've got a Joe who interrupts, dominates conversations, and uses every guest as a soundboard for the same recycled talking points. There's this episode with former Navy SEAL Sean Ryan that went semi-viral for all the wrong reasons. Joe spent more time talking to himself than to his guest. He'd start telling stories, go on tangents, miss jokes.
I watch the show, I see naked people have sex and then sword fight to death. And you're sitting there with your eyes closed. I could only imagine what that would be like. It's better if I don't even see.
And this is from someone who's supposed to be conducting an interview. But it gets worse, because once Joe started believing he was part of some intellectual movement, he stopped doing the one thing that made him dangerous to the establishment. He stopped talking to people who disagreed with him. Case in point, Gavin Newsom. The California governor has been practically begging to come on the show, taunting him on X, making it a public spectacle. And old Joe would have jumped at that opportunity. He would have had him on in a heartbeat just to see what would happen. But new Joe, he just won't do it. He's interesting as like a sociology experiment. Like if you're a psychologist, and fans noticed, they noticed hard. Old Joe would have had Gavin, AOC, and Snoop Dogg in the same week. Now it's just rich buddies and comedy assassins. Which brings us to the guest who might have done the most damage to Joe's reputation. The guest he now seems to regret more than anyone else. And no, I'm not talking about a controversial scientist or a conspiracy theorist. I'm talking about the guy who became president of the United States. But before we get there, we need to talk about Remember when Joe Rogan was the guy who'd call out the establishment? The guy who'd question power? Yeah, about that. Years ago, Joe's friend Duncan Trussell came on the show and gave him a warning that, in hindsight, sounds almost prophetic. Has it ever happened where maybe some really intelligent person has manipulated you in an attempt to get me to disseminate some kind of information out into the world? And Joe laughed it off. Good luck manipulating me, Duncan Trussell. Well, Duncan, wherever you are, you might have been onto something. Enter Peter Thiel. If you don't know who Peter Thiel is, he's a billionaire tech investor who co-founded PayPal and Palantir, a data analytics company with extensive government contracts that has been controversial among privacy advocates. Now, Tim Dillon, one of Joe's comedy friends, had previously come on the podcast and critiqued Thiel pretty heavily. And Joe seemed to agree, nodding along, adding his own concerns. So naturally, when Thiel finally came on the show, you'd expect Joe to ask some tough questions, right? Push back a little? Challenge him on the controversial stuff? That's not what happened. Instead, according to viewers, Joe gave Thiel one of the friendliest platforms imaginable. Softball questions, no pushback, just letting a billionaire with significant political influence say whatever he wanted, and fans were pissed. I have watched every minute of the past 122 episodes of JRE. This is the first time I'm actually insulted after watching an episode, but here's what makes this even more interesting. It's not just Peter Thiel. The whole vibe of the show has shifted toward, let's call them elite-friendly conversations. Elon Musk became a regular. Silicon Valley types started flooding the guest list. And somewhere along the way, the podcast that used to feel like it was for regular people started feeling like a billionaire's club. And this shift, it set the stage for the most controversial decision Joe Rogan ever made. The decision that, according to reports and social media analysis,
When you decided to build the Gigafactory, and when you decided to, just even when you decided to get involved with Tesla, did you have any idea of how difficult this would be? Did you have a preconceived notion?
I thought it would be very difficult. I thought our probability of success was less than 10%.
Whoa.
Yeah, I mean, it would be foolish to think anything else other than that. I mean, even at this point, the only car companies that have not gone bankrupt
might have cost him millions of listeners. Because in 2024, Joe Rogan did something that shocked even his longtime fans. He endorsed Donald Trump for president. Now, I'm not here to debate whether that endorsement was right or wrong. What's interesting is why he did it and what happened after.
Thing turned on you when they found out that you were going to be president. It was very coordinated. And some people are catching on to that now. There's a lot of people that were longtime Democrats like Elon and Bill Ackman and all these different, very intelligent people.
And they support me now. Bill Ackman supports
you now.
me. He's been very supportive, too.
This is what I wanted to ask you.
And I said, boy, we've come a long way since that.
What was it like?
The concept, it was really like two different lives.
Joe went on his show with Elon Musk and laid out his entire thought process. He talked about Democratic hoaxes, about feeling like the Progressive Party had gone too far, about Kamala Harris declining to appear on his show. And in that moment, Joe Rogan, the guy with fuck you money who said he'd never waste his position, used his platform to influence a presidential election. The backlash was immediate. Even his friends started distancing themselves. Bill Burr went on his podcast and, without naming names, seemed to call out what Joe and other podcasters had done. There are certain podcasts out there that, if you're a racist, if you're an anti-Semite, if you're a psycho-nationalist and you want a softball interview, there are podcasts out there. And here's the kicker. The thing that nobody saw coming. Joe seems to regret it. Just months after Trump took office, Joe had Duncan back on the show, and he went on this long rant about immigration policy that directly contradicted everything he'd endorsed. When you're just arresting people in front of their kids and just normal, regular people that have been here for 20 years, that everybody who has a heart can't get along with that? Like, come on, that's crazy. Wait, what? This is the policy you voted for, Joe. This is what Trump campaigned on. And now, according to observers, you're acting surprised? Chameleon. He's a shapeshifter. But hold on, because there's one more piece to this puzzle. One more reason why Joe Rogan's empire is crumbling. And honestly, this one might be the most brutal of all. Because it's not about politics. It's not about billionaires or bad interviews. It's about the thing Joe loves most in the world. Comedy. Alright, let's talk about something that hits different. Joe Rogan has always seen himself as a comedian first. Everything else, UFC commentating, podcasting, even his influence, that all came second to stand-up comedy. And in 2023, Joe decided to put his money where his mouth is. He took some of that podcast fortune and built his own comedy club in Austin, Texas, the Comedy Mothership. On paper, this should have been perfect. A state-of-the-art venue, top-tier sound system, the best comics in the world rotating through. Joe's website calls it a dream and vision to create a comedy community that would draw performers from around the world. And it did draw them. But according to multiple sources, something else came with it. Something darker. Now, is this every show Joe? Probably not. But is it a pattern? Multiple sources suggest yes. And the weirdest part? Even Joe's own comedy circle is starting to back away from it. Andrew Santino, who you'd think would be all in on the Austin scene, has been pretty vocal about keeping his distance. Shane Gillis and Matt McCusker, two of the biggest rising comics who are friendly with Joe, have been cracking jokes about the comedy wars and the sacred art form medicine of comedy. They're mocking it. They're making fun of the self-seriousness of the whole Austin scene. And then there's the Mark Maron situation. Mark Maron and Joe have history. They've had beef before, squashed it, had beef again, but recently Maron said something that cuts deep. My idea of what he's done to comedy, I don't think it's great. I think that it's tribalized, and he's created a sort of army of people that think they know comedy.
I think that it's so effectively tribalized at this point. It really comes down to material. I mean, at what point?
But they only know a specific thing. And Joe's response? According to the podcast, he's calling it jealousy. People are always trying to build themselves up by taking other people down. Mark Maron, I mean, he's sad. He wants other people to hurt. But here's the thing. It's not just Mark Maron saying this anymore. Brian Callen, one of Joe's closest comedy friends, just released a special that was filmed at the Comedy Mothership. Joe promoted it heavily. He had Callen on the podcast to hype it up. When your special kicks in and you start selling out giant theaters. According to social media discussions, the special reportedly underperformed expectations and viewership. For a comedy special with the full weight of the Rogan machine behind it, those are rough numbers. And Callen's reaction? He had a bit of a public meltdown about it. My feelings are hurt so bad. I put out this special and nobody, it doesn't matter. Specials aren't special anymore. But other comedians' specials are doing fine, Brian. Maybe it's not the medium, maybe it's the material, which brings us full circle to where we are now. So let's zoom out and look at what's actually happening to Joe Rogan's empire in 2025. Reports from Podscribe showed significant download fluctuations in early 2025. The Midas Touch podcast, a progressive political show, reportedly surpassed the Joe Rogan Experience in monthly downloads for the first time ever. Think about that. A podcast that most people outside of political circles haven't even heard of is now bigger than Joe Rogan. But it's not just the numbers. In recent months, Joe has been catching heat for spreading what medical professionals consider misinformation about measles. He compared it to chickenpox and suggested it's no big deal, despite the CDC and medical experts stating that measles can cause serious complications, including death, particularly in young children and immunocompromised individuals. And then there's the bot farm defense. When people started criticizing him online, Joe's response was to claim it's all bots. Overseas actors, the CCP using ChatGPT to create fake accounts to make people hate him. Now, are there bots online? Absolutely. Is every person criticizing Joe Rogan a bot? Come on. Here's what I think is really happening and why this matters beyond just one podcaster's career. Joe Rogan built something genuinely special. He created a space where long-form conversations could happen, where experts could actually explain complex ideas, where people from different worlds could connect. But somewhere along the way, maybe when the money got too big, maybe when the influence got too intoxicating, he lost sight of what made it work. The magic was never that Joe was the smartest guy in the room. It was that he knew he wasn't. The magic was never that he had all the answers. It was that he asked the right questions. The magic was never that he was on one side or another. It was that he could talk to both. And now, according to many longtime listeners, he's become the thing he used to mock. The guy with the platform who thinks he's more important than he actually is. Is it over for Joe Rogan? No. He's still got millions of listeners. He's still got that Spotify deal worth up to $250 million. He's still got his comedy club, his UFC gig, his influence. But is he at the peak anymore? The data suggests he's not. And here's the real question, the one that I think will define the next few years. Can Joe Rogan recognize what's happening and change course? Can he go back to what made him great in the first place? Or is this just what happens when you fly too close to the sun? Because right now in 2025, we're watching a king slowly lose his kingdom. And the only person who can save him is himself. That's the story. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Joe can bounce back? Or is the Joe Rogan Experience as we knew it over? If you made it this far, hit that subscribe button. We break down media, culture, and the stories behind the stories every single week. I'll see you in the next one.